Okay, good morning. We're going to call this session of the City of Kenmore Hearing Examiner to order. We have on the agenda today an appeal that was filed by Mr. George Sharaway, and we're here to hear that appeal, an open record appeal proceeding that's governed by the Kenmore Municipal Code. Kenmore Municipal Code has detailed information on the procedures that must be followed in a case such as this. It is a contested case. The appellant had the opportunity to choose contested case or mitigated case. This is a contested case hearing. In part, that means that the city has the responsibility to show by a preponderance of evidence that violations have occurred, in which case the city will have now the obligation to move forward with its presentation of evidence, and then the appellant will be able to respond to the evidence presented. I received in advance of the hearing identification of exhibits and witnesses. I thank the attorneys for complying with that pre-hearing order. That also helps govern the procedures we'll follow at this hearing today. So I'm ready to listen, ready to begin the hearing, and we turn to the city attorney then for presentation of the city's case.
Thank you, Mr. Hearing Examiner. I think if allowed, we'd like to go through some preliminary matters first.
Certainly.
Thank you.
This is Don Rattan, who's city attorney here today.
Correct. Thank you again. Well, first, the city did submit some documents yesterday, but I think I'm going to ask Mr. Sharaway to go ahead. He identified that he'd like to make a request of the hearing examiner at the outset prior to the beginning of testimony, and I was hoping he'd have that opportunity.
First, I want to begin with thank you so much for taking the time to meet up with us today. And I believe, as you know, my first attorney, she withdrew from the case. And the second attorney, she came into this case to review documents and find out all the findings and everything that's related to the case. And
okay, you are Mr. Sharaway?
Yes, yes, sir. I'm sorry,
okay.
George Sharaway.
George Sharaway for the record. And do you have a preliminary matter you want to raise, or are you going to begin testimony?
I'd like to, again, ask for extension based on records that was just submitted last night at 6 p.m. that I did not have. And I don't have time to look at 700 pages, and every Dropbox have another 200 pages, which this is all related to my case to be able to represent myself or have an attorney represent me, and my attorney is not present.
Why isn't your attorney present? They responded to the pre-hearing order.
I believe she asked for 2 extensions and she was denied both times, and I believe the city attorney didn't have a problem with the extension, and based on her being out of town, and this is something I tried to get another attorney to represent me, but no one would take the case since it's not.
So you're here this morning asking for a continuance of this hearing, is that correct?
Yes, please.
And the reason you're asking for a continuance is because you just received documents last night at 6 p.m.?
Yes, I have records that I got last night.
You're holding up in your hand what looks like to be, what, a dozen pages of material?
Sir, it's more like every Dropbox have more like 1,000 pages, and every
so you're holding in your hand emails from the city, is that correct?
Yes.
And they identify that there would be documents available for your review in a Dropbox location.
And it is.
And you're representing that you have not had time to look at those, is that correct?
Yes, sir.
That's the basis for your request for a continuance.
And my attorney is not here also.
And your attorney's not here.
Yes, sir.
When did you learn of that your attorney would not be present?
I learned of that, I can't give you an exact date, but it's approximately about 2 weeks ago.
Mm-hmm. And who did you retain as your legal counsel?
Claudia Newman.
Okay, an individual, or is she part of a law firm?
She's a part of a law firm.
Okay, thank you. City, have any response to this request for continuance from Mr. Sharaway?
Yes, we do. The city does not have an objection and would be in agreement to extend this. I would ask the hearing examiner to look at the Kenmore Municipal Code section 19.30.100. Subsection A talks about expeditious processing of appeals, gives time periods, but it then also provides when reasonably necessary to enable the attendance of all necessary parties at the hearing or the production of evidence, or to otherwise assure that due process is afforded, time periods may be extended upon the agreement of the parties. It is my understanding, I will confirm, that the public records official for the city submitted additional installments to Mr. Sharaway's public records requests last night via email. I believe the timing, there were 1, 2, or 3 responses to him between the timing of 5 p.m. and 6 or 6:30, and that the 5th installment did include a Dropbox. I myself didn't look into the Dropbox, so I don't know the volume. And I do have a concern about him not having enough time to review those records. I also have a concern that Ms. Newman is not here. But because of that, we would request an extension beyond the timeline noted in the code. And if Mr. Sharaway's is in agreement to extend that, I'd ask that he put that on the record.
Give me that last part again. Put what on the record?
So we can extend beyond the code period if there is an agreement by both parties. That's subsection B of 19.30.100. The city is in agreement to extend beyond the period identified in the code so that he has the opportunity to review those documents and that he has counsel.
Is the city ready to proceed with the presentation of its case?
We can proceed today.
Do you have witnesses present?
We do have witnesses present.
And the documents have been submitted that you intend to submit for this record?
That is correct.
Okay. Well, that's what we'll do. We will allow the city then to present its case, and then at the conclusion of that case, I'll entertain your motion for continuance, and it appears that it would be appropriate to grant it. But I think it might be helpful, since the city witnesses are here and we have all the city documents, that you as the appellant be given that opportunity to see the city's case, and that can help shape your response. So the city would present its case this morning, and then we determine a date that you might provide a response. Does that seem fair to you, Mr. Sharma?
Thank you, Your Honor. That's fair.
And Mr. Hearing Examiner, if I may follow up, there was a document that the city filed yesterday with regard, or it might have been Monday, with regard to a revised witness list. We had identified Mr. Thomas Ivy, who is Mr. Sharaway's neighbor, adjacent neighbor. Mr. Sharaway is out of town, it's my understanding, and his consultant, Raymond Frey of Halson Frey, is here on his behalf. It's the same testimony, just a different person, and we're hoping to be able to substitute him for Mr. Ivy.
Is there any objection to having that witness present?
I'm not sure, since don't we have a timeline for that? To be
Well,
able to
we did. In my pre-hearing order,
Yeah.
I identified a time frame for presentation or for identification of witnesses.
Right.
And the city's asking for a substitution of a witness due to unavailability. I think it's appropriate to allow it so then you will know what the city's case is.
That's fine. I'm okay with it.
Okay. So without objection, certainly your witness can present this morning.
Thank you. Then for our first witness, I'd call Fire Marshal LaFlamme to the stand.
And the stand is actually a seat.
Thank you very
can
much.
sit or stand, but it looks more comfortable to be seated. And then once you're seated, I will administer the oath, and that's the process we'll follow for all witnesses that present today. Good morning, sir. Please raise
Good morning.
your right hand. Do you swear to tell truth and testimony you give today?
I do.
Thank you.
Thank you. Can you please state and spell your name for the record?
My name is Jeff LaFlamme. It's spelled L-A, capital F, L-A-M, and the Fire Marshal for the North Shore Fire Department, and we serve the cities of Kenmore and Lake Forest Park.
And as the Fire Marshal for the City of Kenmore, can you explain what your duties are?
I'm responsible for all levels of fire safety and fire prevention. So everything from plan reviews and inspections of new buildings to inspections of existing commercial buildings and fire investigations, public education programs, and the like.
Great. I'm going to ask you to look at what has been submitted already as the city's Exhibit 1. Is that in front of you?
Yes.
Great. Can you tell me what that document is?
This is an incident report from our fire department.
Okay. And are you familiar with incident reports?
Yes. Every fire or emergency-related call that our department goes on, the officer in charge completes an incident report form.
Okay. And is that what this is before you?
Yes.
Okay. Have you had an opportunity to review this incident report?
Yes, I have.
Can you briefly describe what's entailed within it?
So in this is information regarding the address, date that we responded to a particular incident. It gives some basic information about what was discovered and what was done when the crews arrived at the scene.
Great. Let's break that down. So the first one, I think, was the address. What was the address on the incident report?
The address on the report is 15709 61st Avenue Northeast in Kenmore.
And then I believe is a property owner identified.
Property owner identified. Do I have to pronounce this properly?
How about the last name?
Yeah, El Sharway.
Okay. And then what are the, I guess you said, the details or the summary of what they found when they went out to this property?
Yeah, so typically at the end, towards the back part of the incident report, after it covers all the personnel and everyone who was involved with the scene, there is what we call a narrative, and that's typically written by the responding officer. I can read that narrative now.
Or can you
like.
provide a summary of what the narrative states?
Sure. And I think kind of the bottom part of the narrative is kind of the important part, where it indicates that Engine 51, which is our engine from the fire station here in downtown Kenmore, says responded to a report of a boat fire on Lake Washington that came in from somewhere on the other side of the lake. The belief was the call-in thought that it was a boat fire. When they arrived, they found, it says a large 15 by 15 fire of railroad ties that was down near the lake at the bottom of a steep hillside, and that it was railroad ties that were burning.
And then there's a photograph within C1 that looks exactly like that. Those are railroad ties burning. Is that reflective of what was put in the narrative?
Yes.
And then how about your understanding? Did anyone talk to you about this, or how did you become involved in this matter?
Well, our battalion chief, who was on duty at the time, he contacted me via telephone and said that they were at a fire, and gave me a little bit of information. It was railroad ties. It seemed to have been something that they were burning because someone was trying to basically get rid of them without hauling them away. It wasn't an accidental fire or something like that, but it was intentional, that they had extinguished the fire, and he wanted to know, if I needed to respond to investigate, and it sounded pretty straightforward, so I did not respond to that incident, but I asked him to take some photos, and when he explained to me that it appeared that the railroad ties had come from the hillside, that they had been maybe components of some type of retaining system or something like that, I suggested that we should probably forward the information to the city of Kenmore so that they could review and ensure that whatever was being done in the right manner.
Did you forward
hold on.
Oh, excuse me.
A note for the record here, we're proceeding with this case because the city witnesses are present. Mr. Sharway's here without legal counsel. The reason I'm doing that is I anticipate your legal counsel would review this record. The city should offer a transcript without charge to the appellant so they can review the record and then can make objections if this hearing reconvenes. What just occurred was testimony from Mr. Flame that is called hearsay testimony. I'll note for the record that hearsay is specifically allowed in this city as appropriate evidence, and this is referencing Kenmore Municipal Code 120.150, and says specifically the hearing examiner shall allow hearsay testimony by the parties. Also, I'm not to require proof of a chain of custody for evidence, and also I'm to allow any notes, reports, summaries, photographs, or other materials prepared by the parties to be admitted into evidence if requested. And I note that final phrase under Chapter 120, Section 150, because I'm aware the city objected to certain evidence submitted by the appellant. The way I read this guidance offered by the Kenmore City Council is that I have no authority to reject evidence. It'll all be placed in the record. So I interrupt you. I'm sorry for doing that. I should have done this at the outset, but since you went into hearsay testimony, I thought it was an appropriate time to note that all of your material will be admitted into the record, as the Kenmore Municipal Code states I must do, and hearsay evidence will be allowed, as the Kenmore Municipal Code says I must do. I'll note that this Kenmore Municipal Code is an unusual code, and if you have your attorney look at it, they might consider what appropriate action to take with reference to the code itself. However, I have no authority to rule on whether the code is an appropriate code to protect due process and to deal with the issues that you've raised in your appeal. Now, that being said, for the record, please continue with your direct exam of the witness.
Thank you, Mr. Heron, Examiner. Prior to doing that, I'd like to note for the record that I would object to your admission of Mr. Sharway's exhibits prior to him providing them through witness testimony. I believe he will have that opportunity to request admission at the time that his case goes forward.
Well, don't get too disturbed. I'm only ruling on, you raised an objection.
Understood.
I think just yesterday.
Correct.
By filing an official pleading that objects to Exhibit A2, I believe.
Correct. And I would note...
That's what I'm ruling on.
Understood. And I was going to continue the argument is that while the Chapter 1.20 discusses the admissibility of hearsay and foundational evidence, Kenmore Code 19.30.190 specifically says that this hearing examiner shall exclude irrelevant evidence. So to the extent that they offer something and I object at that time as to relevance, again, that's 19.30.190. It doesn't say should, it says shall.
Well, you'll have to...
Understood.
I guess this Chapter 120 is the guidance for contested case hearings.
And it does refer this hearing examiner to, in fact, 19.30 for the rules and conduct of the hearing. I didn't want to go into that until actually we were going to have him admit it, produce it, because it does segue away from these witnesses' testimony. But I just want it for the record and for your...
Okay. Well, I guess we've set the parameters of what's
Thank you very
involved.
much.
And again, we'll note that if this hearing is continued, then there will be an opportunity to present objections.
Thank you very much.
As evidence is submitted. But now we have the discussion set, I guess, between your Chapter 1930 and Chapter 120, Section 150, which again says, any notes, reports, summaries, photographs, or other materials prepared by the parties shall be admitted into evidence if requested. And then you're free to argue the weight.
Thank you.
So
to continue with Fire Marshal Laflamme, my last question, I think you ended on that there was some discussion on whether the city should be contacted. Are you aware whether or not the city was contacted about this property?
Yes, I believe that they were, and I don't recall for sure whether or not it was Battalion Chief Taggart, who I believe is the one who took the photographs, or if I had just called over to let the code enforcement officer know. I don't remember. I remember receiving the phone call to explain to me about it, and even in the narrative here, one of the reasons why I thought it would be a good idea maybe for the city to take a look at it is in the narrative it indicates, it says, property has large and steep hillside with several failing retaining walls made of railroad ties that are being removed and concrete forms in place. The construction crews were on the beach burning the railroad ties that had been removed from the hillside, and then, we had extinguished the fire. And then at the end it says the case will be forwarded to the North Shore Fire Marshal, which is myself, and the City of Kenmore to determine if there are valid permits for the hillside retaining wall construction.
Okay. Thank you very much. I have no further questions for Fire Marshal Laflamme.
Okay, thank you, sir, for being here. Cross-examination may occur upon reconvening of the hearing. Unless, and I'll just give Mr. Charway an opportunity, did you want to ask any clarifying questions of this witness?
No, thank you.
Okay. Thank you for your testimony, and you're excused if you'd like to leave the hearing. Did
Thank
you
you.
have any other witnesses you wanted to call?
I do, thank you. Mr. Bauer, I'd like to ask to testify next.
Good morning. Please raise your right hand. Do you swear to tell truth and testimony you give today?
I do.
Thank you. Can you state your name, spell it for the record, and tell us what your job is?
Sure. Andrew Bauer, last name spelled B-A-U-E-R. I'm a planner with the Development Services Department here with the city. And as a planner, my focus is current development review and also or where it comes into administering zoning code, critical areas, and the shoreline management code.
Okay. I'm going to ask you to look at what has been, first of all, can I ask the hearing examiner, can we please admit C1 into the record?
Yes. C1 is in front of us, subject to any objections that the appellant counsel might raise upon reconvening.
Thank you. I'm going to ask you, Mr. Bauer, to look at C2, and there's that first page. Can you describe what that first page is?
Yes, C2 is a printout from the city's online GIS mapping tool. And it indicates, it's got a box drawn around the property. Looks like it's 15709 61st Avenue. And depicted on the property is several overlays indicating the different environmental critical areas and shoreline management overlays on it.
And then from this, again, this is a city tool, is that correct?
Correct.
And are you familiar with this tool?
Yes.
Do you use this in your daily work?
Yes.
Okay. And when you review this, can you tell me or interpret what information this gives to you?
Yes, so what this tells me is the property, again at 15709, is mapped within a landslide hazard area. It's depicted by the orange crosshatch, and then the legend is on the right-hand side, which indicates landslide hazard area. And then kind of on the left side of the map, you see the blue overlay that's indicating Lake Washington, and then the green overlay is the shoreline jurisdiction area, and that actually extends 200 feet from the edge of Lake Washington. It's kind of underneath the landslide hazard crosshatching.
Excuse me, why do you say landslide hazard? Doesn't that identification just say landslide area? Your key, when you look at the key,
Yes, you're correct.
so you add in hazard?
I guess I'm referring to how it's referenced in the city's critical areas code.
But to clarify, Mr. Bauer, the paper you have in front of you just says landslide area, correct?
It does,
Okay.
yes.
I want you to know I'm paying attention.
I am, I'm going to actually have you go towards City Exhibit 8. Do you have that in front of you?
Yes.
Okay. What is that document?
This is a pretty standard correction notice that was issued by the city.
Mm-hmm. And have you yourself issued any of these, or are you familiar with this type of document?
I've issued them before, not typically, but yes, I'm familiar. I typically will assist in preparing some of the language and things that go into them.
And what is the correction notice? What's the purpose for it?
The purpose is to seek voluntary correction from a property owner or someone who's potentially violated any of the municipal codes. The city's policy is always to work with people that may have committed a violation to get voluntary correction prior to issuing a violation notice.
And what's the date this was issued?
December 10th, 2015.
And then who is it directed towards?
Mr. L. Sharaway,
And then can you identify the address?
15709 61st Avenue Northeast.
So what were the violations noted in this correction notice for Mr. Sharaway?
So there's a list of violations here cited. The first one under the violation heading says grading operations cause erosion and surface water drainage problem. Number 2 is land alterations and retaining wall construction without receiving a permit first. Number 3 is concrete retaining walls were poured after the stop work order was placed on May 27th, 2015. Number 4 states a hazard has been made by removing old retaining wall structures and replacing some without a geotech report and inspections of the walls.
Okay. And then, so those are the violations that were identified. Is corrective action also identified?
Yes.
And what is that?
So following after the violations, it states corrective action required and states on May 27, 2015, the city posted a stop work order and made you directed at Mr. Sharaway, aware of the violations. On August 25, 2015, it came to the city's attention construction on the retaining walls has not stopped. August 28, 2015, we met at City Hall and told you what is required to receive permits. Immediately, it is required to take steps necessary to stabilize the hillside in conformance of the 2009 King County Surface Water Design Manual. This work needs to be completed before December 14, 2015 at 9 a.m. This temporary erosion control must remain in place and be constantly maintained throughout the rain season, which is October 1st through April 15th.
And does it also identify what types of permits are required?
Yes. Next paragraph states that the following permits need to be applied for, which include a building permit, grading permit, and shoreline exemption checklist.
So this corrective notice essentially is telling the owner, Mr. Sharaway, that there are violations on this property and how he would need to correct it. Is this a notice of violation itself or just a warning, if you will?
This would appear to be a warning because it kind of outlines the timelines to move or to comply by applying for the necessary permits.
Okay. And it talks about the initial stop work order on May 27th, 2015, correct?
Yes.
Okay. I'm going to ask that the city's exhibit number 8 be admitted.
Yeah, and to clarify the process that we use here in this hearing examiner forum in the city of Kenmore, the exhibits you submitted are
Already admitted.
presumed to be admitted
Okay.
unless there's an objection, and then we rule on the objection. Again, because of this unusual procedure, if the appellant's counsel has objections, we'll entertain those later. But right now, you can
Understood.
assume they're admitted.
Thank you very much, Mr. Hearing Examiner. That should help to expedite. I'm going to ask that you go ahead and look at City Exhibits 2. And there are a variety of photographs under C2. Have you had an opportunity to look at those?
Yes.
Okay. Can you summarize what it portrays, what the photographs portray? Oh, first of all, I'm going to, on the first one, photo 1, is there a date stamp on it?
Yes, in the bottom right corner, the date stamp says 5/27/2015.
Great. And then there's some sort of summary at the top left hand. Could you read that for us?
Yes, it says site visit photos 5/27/15, and it references the code enforcement case P 2015-029 Sharaway.
Okay. And then I'm going to ask that you go to the second photograph. What does that photograph depict?
Looks like a pit in the ground that's been excavated. Looks like there's some ash and debris kind of strewn about. I'm assuming this is where the railroad ties had been burning.
Mm-hmm. And then I'm going to ask you to go to photo 3 and describe briefly what that photograph depicts.
So this photo is looking down at some concrete that looks like it's been poured and some rebar extending up out of the ground.
Okay. And then going to photograph 4, same question. What does that depict?
Similar to the last, it looks like it's maybe taken from a different angle. Again, you see concrete that's been poured, rebar extending up. Looks like it's retaining some of the slope there.
Okay. And then going to the next photograph, photo 5, what does that depict?
Looks to be taken a little higher up the slope. You can pretty easily see where the hillside's been cut in for retaining walls. Again, you see the concrete, the rebar. There's 3 people standing down near the shoreline.
Holding tools?
Yeah, holding tools. And then there's some equipment and things kind of around them, so it looks like they've been working on the hillside.
It suggests that. So when you look at that, I noticed that those cuts in the ground, and it looks like cement is poured. Is the cement above grade?
It looks to be below grade.
Okay, so it's not raised above the natural ground, correct?
Correct.
Okay. And then the next photograph, what does that look like? Or what does that depict?
Some sort of tool. I'm not sure what that is.
And then the photograph 7, what does that depict?
And for the record, using numerical identification, the Exhibit I has alphabetical. So if one's following along, the numbers line up with the letters. Do you have numbers on yours?
I don't.
I have Exhibit 2G. For
Oh, I
example.
apologize. I do not have those.
Okay.
Thank you. So that's 2G. I'll write that.
I don't. You
Thank
were
you.
using a number.
Correct, and I will use those from now on. I apologize. I did not have that. Going to 2G, can you describe that?
So 2G was the previous one with the tool. Mine are also.
Oh,
labeled
2G
with
was
letters, yes.
the orange one. Okay,
And
That's not how I have it.
and I thought that the next one was
Okay.
the 2G.
Okay, mine must be different. So the next one shows, it looks like the edge of the house and some type of corrugated pipe coming out. It's some type of a drain, maybe a roof drain or something.
And 2H, is that a similar type photo?
Yes.
Okay. And then going back to photograph D, and 2D would be the photograph with the 3 workers. I believe you earlier testified that Mr. Sharaway's property had an overlay of landslide area. If work like this was required or was being done on this property, in your knowledge or understanding, would a permit be required?
Yes.
Okay. And were those permits identified in City Exhibit 8 for that correction notice?
Yes.
Okay. And could you again briefly summarize what those would be?
Yeah, the permits identified were a building permit, grading permit, and a shoreline exemption.
Okay. I'm going to ask that you go to City's Exhibit C3 and describe what that photograph depicts. And Mr. Hearing Examiner, does that also say 3A? Does that photo, I don't have any identification on mine.
I'm sorry, are you moving to a different set of photographs?
Correct. C3.
Yes, that's how I have it.
3A. Thank you. Could you describe 3A for me?
Yes, 3A is a picture of a City of Kenmore stop work order that's been posted, and it's date stamped in the lower right, August 25th, 2015.
And can you see, it's hard for me because I'm pretty short-sighted, but farsighted. What does the posted date say in the actual document? Can you see that?
It matches the date of the timestamp on the photo, so August 25th, 2015.
Okay. And what does this stop work, why are stop work orders posted?
Stop work orders are posted when someone's conducting work without a permit that's necessary.
Okay. And is this date, well, never mind, that's a separate question. I'm going to ask you to go ahead and look at the next photograph, which is C-3B. And what does that depict?
That's a picture of another stop work order, and this one's posted on a deck railing.
So a second one on wood or the pilings, and then one on the deck. How about the next photograph, 3C?
This
be the
looks like
same one.
it's the same one
Correct.
on the deck railing.
Okay. And then how about 3D?
Uh, 3D is a picture of a concrete wall, it looks like, doesn't look like rebar, it looks like some type of a pipe or something extending up out of it.
Is that concrete above grade?
It looks partially above grade, looks like it's partially buried.
Okay. And then the next photograph, 3E.
This looks like some materials that are piled up, looks like rebar.
Okay. And then the next photograph, 3F, as in Frank.
This is a picture of another stop work order. Again, date stamped August 25th. It looks like this one's posted right next to the address numbers and front door.
Thank you. And then
Well, I don't understand. Is this a third stop work order? You've testified to there is a, and then you said a second stop work order. Now you say another. Is another something different than the first or second?
Yes, this was a third stop work order
So
posted.
but when you say a third stop work order, you mean that the property had 3 separate notices posted on the property at the same time, on the same day?
Yes.
So they weren't different stop work orders. He just received 3 different stop work orders so that they could see it. Is that correct?
Correct.
Okay.
I believe the intent was that anyone working on the site would see the stop work order.
Because one's on the
notice was
deck,
posted.
one is on some pilings, and one's at the front door, but they're all the same document, correct?
Yes.
Okay. And then going to photograph 3G, what does that depict?
This looks like a number of tools and materials that are piled along a pretty big cut, it appears, on the hillside.
Okay. Does that cut give you concern?
Yeah, it looks steep, if not almost entirely vertical. It looks completely exposed and almost looks like it's been kind of eroding, or some of the dirt has sloughed off as you look kind of where in the picture, as you continue down the hillside or the slope. Looks like there's quite a bit of loose dirt there.
Do you see any types of temporary erosion control measures in this photograph?
No.
Okay. Please describe the next photograph, 3H.
This is, again, more concrete and more rebar. Looks like some of the concrete, again, is almost entirely buried. And then it looks like in the the foreground of the picture, there's maybe some forms or something that have been placed for more concrete.
And then, again, the next photograph, 3I.
Yeah, it looks like some concrete formwork and more materials and supplies, tools, and concrete in the background.
The concrete in the background and the forefront, can you see whether or not that is below grade or above grade?
Looks like it's primarily below grade with some of it exposed above grade.
Okay, and do you see any temporary erosion control measures in this photograph?
No.
Can you please describe the next photograph, 3J?
3J, again, more clearly showing the formwork for the concrete in the background, and then the kind of in the middle of the picture is a tree that's been cut or partially cut.
And then the next photograph, 3K?
More concrete formwork and concrete walls.
Now, can you please describe that concrete work? Is that at grade, below grade, or above grade?
Again, it looks to me like it's primarily below grade with some of the concrete walls exposed above grade.
Tell me why I'm concerned whether it's above or below grade.
I'm just trying to show the progression of the work. But
Okay, because it introduces a whole set of questions about what grade is and whether it was
Understood.
original grade or modified grade.
I'll change the question.
Well, not if it, does it go to a alleged violation?
Yes, well, not
Above
the
or
grade.
below?
No, the grade isn't
Then
relevant.
we can kind of skip that, right?
Right.
That would be helpful.
Does this photograph show a progression of work that wasn't within the photographs you described in C2?
Let me flip back to C2 here. Yes, comparing C2 and C3, definitely it appears there's much more substantial concrete's been poured. The walls in C3 are really taking shape as opposed to C2 where you just see some of the rebar and things extending up. In C3 you see the progression of the wall going up and almost taking on a final condition.
And then can you please describe the next photograph in C3, 3L?
Again, it looks like more concrete walls, more concrete formwork, and maybe some of the, or one of the walls maybe in the process of being backfilled.
Okay, and then the date stamp on the bottom right.
August 25th, 2015.
Okay. And then briefly depict 3M, the next photograph.
Yeah, this is kind of a more zoomed out shot of the hillside looking down, and you kind of see how substantial some of the formwork and the cut on the hillside is.
And when you say the cut, is that, so at the very near point of the photograph, there looks to be some sort of just groundwork. Is that what you mean by the cut?
Yes.
Okay.
Yeah, kind of where the hillside is exposed and where the walls are being poured.
And then do you see any temporary erosion control measures in this photograph?
No.
Okay. And then can you go to the next photograph, 3N?
Yeah.
And then what is that?
This looks like it's looking down the hill, and it's potentially maybe a property line has been strung or something there.
And then if you will go to the next document, it's not a photograph, it has the title Stop Work. What does the description of the Stop Work document say? Why it was issued?
It says no permit for work, last stop work order violation, tree removal with no permit,
Okay, and what was the date for that?
August 25th, 2015.
Okay. So I'm going to ask you to go to Exhibit C4, which looks to be an email from you. Is that correct?
Correct.
Can you describe just the contents of the email and what led you to draft this email?
Yes, so the email is summarizing a conversation that Mike Thomas, former code enforcement officer with the city, and myself had with Mr. Sherway.
Okay, and so you had a meeting with Mr. Sharway?
Yes.
Okay, and when was the date of that meeting?
August 28th, 2015.
So that would have been after the stop work order had been posted, is that correct?
Yes.
Or the second stop work order?
Yes.
Okay. And can you, if you can recall, briefly just describe the meeting itself?
So Mike and I met with Mr. Sherway, and he had come in that morning in response to the stop work orders that had been posted on the 25th of August. And we sat down with him in a conference room here at City Hall and talked to him about what he needed to do to remedy the stop work order, get that lifted.
And let's stop there. So what were the remedies?
Essentially, file a permit application for all of the work that had been occurring. So that would include building permits for the retaining walls, grading permit for the land alteration. We informed him that the work would require a geotechnical engineer just because of the slope, being that it's in a landslide area. And then also he would need to file for a shoreline exemption.
Okay. And what was his response to that?
He had kind of expressed that he didn't want to get the permits. Multiple times he kind of encouraged us to look the other way and just make an exception this one time, and that he would take care of it.
Okay. And were you able to do that?
No.
And did you tell him?
When did that happen? When was your conversation where this occurred?
This was the morning of August 28th, 2015.
And who else was present? When you say they or we?
Mike Thomas.
Okay, thank you.
So there was 3 in the meeting, 3 people?
Yes, it was myself, Mike Thomas, and Mr. Sherway.
And you mentioned, or you testified, that you had also recommended a geotech. Is that correct?
Yes.
And again, what was the purpose for that?
Because of the slope on the property, just the sensitive nature of how steep it is, wanting to have a professional engineer kind of assess the work that had been done, and then also provide recommendations on the design of the walls.
Okay. And the email identifies that the permits were attached. Is that correct?
That's correct, yes. We provided him with the application forms and everything necessary for him to file for a permit.
Okay. And in fact, are those a part of C4, the permit applications? Were those the ones that were provided in the email?
Yes.
What were those permit applications?
So the first one is labeled on mine C4B, and it has a copy of a sticky note. We actually gave him a hard copy of this materials at the meeting that morning, and then attached it to this email that we sent to him.
So Mr. Sharway received these in 2 different ways.
Yes.
Okay. And can you describe the other permit documents that you gave him?
Yes, so the first one labeled in the upper left corner is Form 101. It's the city's standard permit application form.
And that's C-4B?
Correct. C-4C is Form 302. It's the city's grading permit checklist. So this is a checklist that would be completed by an applicant and kind of tells them what they need to submit for a grading permit application.
Now, I see in subsection 3 of that grading permit that there's 2 boxes checked. Which are those? What are those boxes that have been checked?
Yes, so I checked these boxes, and the first one is landslide hazard, and the next one is erosion hazard.
Okay. And why did you check those?
I checked those based off of the city's critical area mapping that indicates his properties in both landslide and erosion hazard.
Thank you. And then the next page, C4D, there's a star on subsection 7. What is that? Did you put that star there?
I did, yes. We informed him that he needed to stabilize his site to the best of his ability while he sought permits from the city, understanding that it's a sensitive slope, that he needed to stabilize it, get temporary erosion control measures up.
Okay. And then the next page, C-4E, there's something highlighted that says geotechnical report. Did you highlight that?
Yes.
And was that, why did you do that?
We informed him that he would need to get a geotechnical engineer as part of the grading permit application.
So the next application is C-4F as in Frank, retaining wall checklist. And I'll just go to there's an area highlighted. Did you highlight that?
Yes.
And why did you do that?
This is under the section for submittal requirements of construction plans for retaining walls. And although the walls may not have all been over 6 feet in height, it's required when deemed necessary by the building official to be designed by a professional engineer licensed in the state.
And would that be because of the steepness of the site?
Yes.
Okay. There's some other documents. Do you want to just very briefly describe what those are?
Yes. Exhibit C4G is the checklist of materials needed to request a shoreline exemption. So I had marked up kind of what he would need to submit at a minimum.
And then some things are stricken out, meaning he didn't have to provide certain information. You did that, so the NA is not applicable. You don't have to do it?
Correct.
Okay.
Yeah, we were trying to work with him and really kind of narrow down what, some of these forms and paperwork can be overwhelming to a property owner, so we try to work with them and really focus on what we need at a minimum to guarantee that we have a complete permit submittal.
And then on page C4J, I see a preferred geotechnical consultants. You provided that to him also?
Yes. So